Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons, and my guest today is a man whose views and actions are really less than controversial. As president of Georgia, Mikheil Saakashvili was lauded in the West for transforming Georgia from near-failed state to a model in the fight against corruption and for reform. But now he's back, not in his native Georgia, but as Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's top foreign policy advisor and head of Ukraine's Advisory International Council on Reforms. Mikheil Saakashvili, thanks very much for being on the interview.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're somebody who knows better than most what it is from bitter experience how to deal with Vladimir Putin. Given your experience back in Georgia in 2008 in particular, what sort of advice will you be giving to Petro Poroshenko now?
Well, I think we should view in what's happening in Ukraine as part of a larger campaign, and I think it's not so much about land grabs or the new lines or new territories or new population transfers, which obviously is taking place, and it amounts to a tragedy with lots of people being killed. But I think the key underlying factor here is very ideological. It's a battle of whether all of us, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, you just name them, including Russia itself, can get out of this grip of Sovietism, corruption, cronyism, inefficient societies, or we are doomed forever to stay where we used to be.
Okay, so the key
a failed state run by corrupt mafias or corrupt elites. And actually, this is this fight. And Putin is going to go till the end, because the only way how he can preserve his power in Russia is keeping these kind of systems all over its former Soviet space.
How important is it to Ukraine that it should have the full backing right across the board from the European Union and to a lesser extent from the United States in that process?
Well, we created here now the International Board of Advisors. So obviously we need to bring in fresh forces from the top reformers also to have experience. We have some in former Soviet space. There's a big group of Georgian reformers working all around Ukrainian ministries. Many of them have taken Ukrainian nationality, so they've become Ukrainians and work as Ukrainian officials. But also we want to get top Europeans and Americans. And the idea obviously is that Ukraine aspires to be part of the European Union. Ukraine will eventually be part of wider Europe, like full-fledged. I think it has potential of being one of the leading members of future, whatever European Union shape will be in the future. But for that, it fundamentally has to change the way how things function here. Corruption is the key issue. There was almost a consensus in countries, elite, that they had to plunder their country, and it has lasted since the first day of their independence, all the way until now. Despite the fact that they had two popular uprisings and revolutions directed exactly against these corrupt practices, it's still very much in place. That's a very big challenge that makes them incompatible with their integration to Europe. There are the other inefficiencies that they have, but overall, Ukraine also has very strong credentials. It has very lively debate. It has very strong civil society, very bright young people, and basically,
if I could interrupt you, I think it's clear that Ukraine has a lot going for it. It's large. It's right at the centre of Europe. It's got them it faces at the moment, apart from the ones that you have listed of corruption and so on and so forth, is the fact that it is effectively in a war with Russia. Given that, do you think that the Ukraine's allies, and I'm thinking in particular of the European Union, understand fully that the problem that Ukraine is facing?
Well, I think they should. Obviously there is war with Russia. War is a huge handicap. Russia is after the whole Ukraine, not after only the east or the south of Ukraine. But I think Russia is also after overall the idea of Europeanism, and certainly it's a big issue for the European Union. Ukraine certainly is a front line of defense for Europe, and I think that there is not full awareness of it yet. I think there has been more awareness. I mean, there has been obviously talks conducted under the auspices of the European Union. But as I said, I mean, President Poroshenko and his team, and I've been working with them for quite some time now, have strong will. I mean, at least they've done some very extraordinary things to go all the way to, towards some kind of European standards, rapprochement with Europe. Certainly, they've done a lot to also talk not only to the U.S. administration, but to the U.S. public. I can tell you that Poroshenko's speech to the Congress was amazing.
One of the things that Petro Poroshenko is calling for is weapons. It's weapons. Do you think it's a good idea? The European Union clearly doesn't at this stage think it's a good idea. You appear to be in favor of arming Ukraine. Is it a good idea, though? Is it the advice you should be giving to Petro Poroshenko?
Look, I think Ukraine is like West Berlin now. What was the idea of West Berlin? It was absolutely crucially important for the Soviet Union, for Stalin to take over West Berlin. And then the West stood up and made from West Berlin a showcase, which means that first it was defended physically, and then it was made into a very successful case in parallel. And that's, I think, more or less, Ukraine is a very large West Berlin. And I think Europe has experience of dealing with this kind of situation. Germany has experience. Let's say Ukraine is East Germany for Germany for Germany to reform, but on the other hand, potentially Russia is East Germany for already reformed Ukraine, and Ukraine should be this kind of West Berlin model. And for that, for West Berlin, as Ukraine to survive as a West Berlin, it needs to be physically protected. And the physical protection, I've been hearing for all these years, well, it's old-fashioned. The tanks are no longer menacing Europe. It's 20th century, but the reality is here. We are a long way into 21st century, and still Russian tanks are rolling deeper and deeper into the European continent, and you need anti-tank weapons to stop them. You need the Russian artillery shelling here lots of places, and you need radars at least to track from where they are being shelled. You need communications equipment to avoid Russian jamming and cyber war, anti-cyber war technology. So basically, these people they cannot use anti-tank weapons for attacking the Russians. You cannot go and invade, say, Russian territory with anti-tank weapons, but it certainly is very helpful in at least halting for some time the Russian advance and giving time for diplomacy. And meanwhile, also giving time to start West Berlin type of reforms.
I hear what you're saying, but just the other day you said that given weapons and the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces have fantastic fighting spirit, they could occupy the whole of Russia. They could seize the whole of Russia. Is that the sort of statement in the present context, you think, that is helpful?
No, I didn't really say that. That was the spin of Russian propaganda. What I really said, that some of our officers say that their fighting spirit is so great that they could go all the way through. But of course, I added immediately that there is no way, not a single chance that Ukrainians will ever want to attack the Russians. They just want to liberate their own territory. And that's the whole idea of Ukraine. They're a very, very peaceful nation. People are waiting for concrete results. The last thing people wanted last year in Maidan is to go and fight with the Russians, and I think this will stay this way no matter what atrocities Russians continue
very briefly, because we're coming to the end of the program now.
Fundamentally want peace.
Very briefly, because we're at the end of the program now. The Russians, Vladimir Putin in particular, are talking about the federalization of Ukraine. Is that something that you think is acceptable or could be acceptable to Ukraine, given your own experience with South Ossetia and Abkhazia?
Well, first of all, Vladimir Putin, I have my own experience of dealing with Putin, and I know that he thinks that Ukraine should disappear altogether because he always said it's an artificial territory. But when he says federalization, that's basically handicapping somebody to the extent that they can never perform, never can implement the reforms, because we are implementing the kind of reforms we did in Georgia, making Georgia from one of the most non-corrupt states to corrupt state to one of the most non-corrupt, one of the most criminalized, one of the safest. Ukrainians want the same thing, but you cannot do those things if you don't have efficient functioning government. We need peace not at the cost of destroying the country, but there is no bad peace agreement.
Okay.
That's bad peace if it's a genuine one, obviously. And
Mikheil
war is
Saakashvili,
always bad
thanks
and
very
will
much
always be bad.
for
That's a
being
consensus
our
about
guest here
PKK.
on the interview on France 24 today. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Don't go away. More news and headlines to follow.